Here we go. Okay. Episode 2 of the Mark Andreini interview. On the first interview, we discussed the 50s and 60s. And this show, we're going to delve into the 70s and 80s.
80s?
You want to just do 70s?
Well,
Mr. French, what do you think? We have an advisor here, exemplary advisor on this. He's in the wings.
Let's see if we can cover it.
Should we just do the 70s and then do the 80s another time?
If it spills over into the 80s, I'm on it.
Okay, so no spilling into the 80s. Keep it within the 70s.
We'll start there.
If it gets dark and cold, we'll do the 80s another time.
That's fine. That's fine.
Okay. January 1st, 1980. What was going on?
January 1st, 1980? No, January 1st, 1970.
January 1st, 1970.
Yes. January 1st, 1970, I think that was 1 month before I flew to Peru, my first big trip by myself, leaving the country. And I went to Peru with one friend, and we only went to Peru because we couldn't afford to go to Australia. That's where I'd have rather gone. But I only had $400. It used to cost $1,000 to go to Australia.
How much did it cost to get to Peru?
1970. $400.
Okay.
That's how much I got for my van.
Yeah.
So I went to...
Which van did you have? Which is Volkswagen?
It was a Corvair factory camper.
Yeah.
It was really
But you
cool.
wish you still had that car.
They're all good, yeah. I wish I had lots of them. So I went to Peru, and we'd read all about the surf there. They had the Peruvian International Invitational, and that was essentially the world format at the time. That's where all the people from all over the world would come and compete. It's a 2-week event. I didn't go for that, but I flew down there not knowing that event was going to be held in about 3 days after I got there.
Yeah.
So my friend went up to Machu Picchu, and I don't even know how I got. I mean, this was a long time ago, right? So I ended up...
The 70s is a long time ago.
Well, it's January 1st, 1970 is a really long time ago. So I'm 19, and I get driven down to the Club Waikiki, which is it's like a country club at the beach. And I made friends. Somebody took me in. I had a place to stay, and I didn't have any money or a car or anything. So, I bought a one-way ticket. I didn't know what I was going to do. I just flew down there, and this is what happens.
So
day
you got a
one.
one-way ticket. You got no money, but you got a place to stay, right?
First day, yeah. And then 2 days later, I got invited to be in the Peruvian Invitational. They asked me to come join and serve. It's a 2-week event.
Did they not have enough guys, or they know who you were?
Nobody knows. And I'm just a 19-year-old kid. I just started making boards. I didn't even bring one of my own. I brought a Hout with me that I traded. Whatever board I'd made was one of the bad ones. And so I got a Hout 7.4 roundtail from my friend John Chapin. And I brought that with me. It was a great board. And so I just made friends, and I was in the contest. It was incredible. I met every famous guy at the time. George Downing, Joey Cabell was there, Gordo and Flaco Barreto, Jimmy Blair's, who became world champion 2 years later. There's, Lord Tally-Ho, Lord Blair's is his dad, and Lord Blair's is his sister. All these guys are there, and many more. I met all the top surfers and shapers from Brazil and Peru, and made friends with all of them. And we're just kids, and it was epic. Epic. And Mike Purpose was there representing California, so him and I ended up becoming really good friends, and we represented California. And after the event, he invited me to come and spend the summer with him. So this must have been in May of 1970. So I flew. You're
still in Peru at that time, or did you go back and come back?
No, I was
still there.
I stayed there. I met him. Was there a number of months, and we traveled and surfed, by bus and whatever. I surfed the whole coast of Peru, just being taken around with the Peruvian friends I made. But Mike Purpose brought me back to his house at Hermosa Beach he was like one of the top 2 surfers in California at the time. He was in the world contest. He was an incredible surfer. Really a great guy. I spent the whole summer with him. And so that was my first time really spending time in Southern California. So we surfed from Hermosa Beach down to the cliffs in San Diego.
Yeah.
And, you know, of course, all of his friends are famous. And Rolf Arness was one of his close friends who had surfed with us often, who he became world champion the next year. Rolf Arness was the closest surfer that I've ever known to Tommy Curran. Those two were the 2 finest surfers I ever was in the water with. They're both very similar. So
What made them so good in your eye?
they went through the water like there was no resistance. They would just paddle like they're floating on a cloud, right past everybody. With this fluidity, this incredible smooth motion with incredible speed with no effort. That's how both of them are when you're in the water with them. You know, I've surfed with really great surfers, including our friend over here to my right, who is always one of the top surfers here, Mr. French.
Yeah.
And, you know, over the years we've surfed with world-class guys, including, you know, Sean Thompson and Kelly Slater. I've surfed with those guys at Jeffreys Bay when it's 6 to 8 feet. You know, I mean, I've surfed around all these famous people, and none of them compare to Tommy Curran or Rolf Arness. There's
Do you agree with that, Mr. French? Yeah.
Tommy, definitely.
Yeah, well, Rolf, not many people surf with
I
Rolf,
never surfed.
but he was just like Tommy. Yeah, they're magic, pure magic in the water. But I digress. I somehow got myself into the... No, that's still 70s. Okay, so that's Peru. So I finished surfing...
Peru sounded like a fun trip.
Oh, it's...
You were there like a year there or 6 months there?
No, just 4 months.
But it sounds like you remember every minute of
How
it.
do you forget it?
Yeah.
It was...
Okay.
But, so then I returned, and that's when I really got going with my surfboard career, which actually started, you know, that was the Vietnam War. That you have to talk about Vietnam,
Right.
because that was the number one dark cloud that hung over
The whole country.
all of us
Right.
worldwide. It was a horrific time of, you know, moral debate. You know, do I go? A lot of people went to Canada. A lot of people tried to get out of the draft. My mom raised us to, you know, follow the 10 Commandments, never do anything you shouldn't do. But I really believed that my conscience, I wasn't raised in any church at that point, but my conscience said I can't go start shooting people. You know, I just didn't believe I could do it. So I applied for a conscientious objector status and eventually got it. And then the lottery came out, and I had a high lottery number, so I was number 312. I wasn't even going to get drafted after all that.
Right.
So when I got back from Peru, I decided that it would be the right thing to do to serve my country, so I did civil service duty.
What did you, in what regard, in what
Well,
capacity?
Well, what they did is there was a center that would assign you to that type of work. They would place you, and I was placed in a home taking care of a man who had got polio 6 months before the vaccine came out. And so I was a medical
Caretaker.
attendant, a caretaker,
Yeah.
right? So I did that for a year, and I was staying at my dad's house in San Mateo for that year. So
Did your dad mind you being a conscious objector?
Of course he did.
Of course. Did you guys battle it out, or is this?
I have a lifetime of battles with my dad,
Yeah.
but that's okay. I always follow my conscience.
Yeah.
And so I did that, and while I was doing that, I had already been making surfboards, right, in the 60s for myself. And so it's the shortboard revolution is in just full swing, right? And I'd sold my out in Peru, so I'd come home and make myself a board. And so on the weekends, I would make one surfboard every weekend. I'd make myself a board, I'd go surfing, and because I was staying in San Mateo, I would go surf the San Mateo coast. You know, Año Nuevo, Waddell Creek,
Yeah.
come down to 4 Mile, Santa Cruz.
I like it there, but sharky there.
Yeah. Well, we didn't know anything. We didn't know any better.
Right.
So it was fine. And actually, in those days, those breaks were not really surfed yet. I mean, no one surfed Scott's Creek yet. Waddell was unsurfed. That's where I tested all my boards. I'd go there with my brother and a few friends and be the only ones there.
Yeah.
And 4 Mile maybe would have 1 or 2 guys, but it wasn't there. Nobody surfed up there.
Yeah.
So every time I went to the beach, I would see somebody, and what seemed like every week I'd get an order when I go surfing. I don't know where or how, but the guy would see my board. Where'd you get that board? I made it. Will you make me one? Sure. So
How much were you selling the boards at the time?
I believe I'm going to say they were $65 because I would buy my materials either from John Mill, and he just moved up here the year before. I'd either go to John Mill or Bob Weiss in San Francisco. Both of them sold materials, and they're like 1 or 2 years older than me, right?
Yeah.
And so I'd buy a blank resin and fiberglass, and then I would make 1 surfboard
Where'd you shape those boards at?
at my dad's house in the garage.
Did your dad mind?
I don't think Dad liked anything I did. Of course he didn't like it. So, but that's okay.
But you're an entrepreneur, and you're making money. You're making the beginning for yourself.
Well,
what was wrong with that?
It's even funnier than that. So I'm making a board every week, and this only is going on for maybe 4 months. And I hooked up with Robert Johnson, who is a really well-known Half Moon Bay guy who is in the boat building business, and he's taken up glassing surfboards. And he saw my boards and he said, "Hey, I need a shaper. Why don't you shape?" Because I made the whole board, but he said, "You shape all glass."
In Half Moon Bay.
Yeah, so he had a barn, like the Country Soul era we were in, and he had a really cool barn on Prisma Canyon Road. And he lived there with his girlfriend, Nadine, who became his wife. They've been together their entire lives. And he glassed and airbrushed, and I shaped, and I made my own. I made all my logos then because I learned how to silkscreen. And so I made a Half Moon Bay, like a oval with a little corner cut out like a moon, half moon, and it was Half Moon Bay surfboards. And I never knew it, but Jeff Clark told me, like in the 90s, he says, "I ripped off your logo, right?" And I looked at his Clark logo, and it's the oval with a little corner. And I just was laughing because I never thought about that.
Right.
But we made boards for all the San Mateo Coast guys, including Jeff Clark. He's probably 13 years old at the time.
Wow. Yeah.
So I shaped all their boards, and then my dad said, "Hey, we're going to Maui for a couple weeks. Will you house sit while we're gone?"
Where was the house at?
It's in San Mateo.
Yeah.
So I've been there maybe 4 or 5 months. I don't know how long. Maybe it was a year because it's hard to remember. But anyway, they go away. The second they leave, all my friends and all their girlfriends are coming over, and we're having parties and barbecues every night. In the house, there's about nothing left of it by the time they get back. So Dad comes home and he says, "If you want to be in the surfboard business, then you need to get out of here and go find a job." He didn't realize I already had one.
Right.
So he said, "You go out, you go to every shop until you find a place that'll hire you, and you're leaving in 10 days. He gave me 10 days.
To get out.
To get out.
Yeah.
So I built a camper for the back of my 58 Dodge pickup, put it on the back. It was really cool, an A-frame. I made the glass window and painted a waterfall on the door and all this shit. And of course I had a beard and long hair. I looked just like my brother.
Yeah. Today.
I looked homeless. But you didn't look homeless then. You looked like, subversive.
Right.
So I got in my truck and I went down, all the way down Highway 1, and of course there's only 2 surf shops. One was in Monterey, and I don't remember where the other one was. I ended up right back in Santa Barbara where I'm raised. And the first place I go was Spindrift Surfboards, and Richard Reed owned it and Bob Hawkinson. And both of them were in Hawaii at the time, and a young guy was kind of running the shop, and "Hey, we need a shaper." So they hire me. So serendipitously.
Did you show your boards, or they just...
Oh yeah, I brought a board with me. That was my calling card. I brought a really cool 6'5" arc-tail stubby I'd made, and "We want you to work here." So I worked it. So I shaped it at Spindrift, And within 3 months, they decided to fold. And I'd met John Campbell from New York, who was the glasser. He's a really great guy. He's a real legend in New York. He's older than me. And
in the surfboard business.
yes,
On the East Coast.
yes, and he was glassing there at Spindler if I was shaping. And he says, and I'm a man of the world at like 19 or 20. And so those guys said, hey, you know, just do your own thing. So I bought them out for $150. I bought their racks. I never owned any tools at this point.
Yeah.
So I bought a planer and I bought their racks and I changed it to Andreini surfboards. So that would have been 1971.
Andreini, so that's right. Andreini surfboards first came to fruition was in Santa Barbara, 1971.
Yes, that's when I started using my name. I mean, I've been making boards really for 2 years already, but that was when I started putting my name on them, you know. So that's the beginning of the 70s.
Were you making any type of anybody who wanted? Did you advise people what to do, what to shape, or did you make anything?
I made custom boards, and I basically was like all of us. You know, Randy was part of all this. We were all connected through the coconut pipeline, or is it the pineapple pipeline? I can't remember what it's called. The coconut wireless. So all the Australians were making hulls. You know, they started with the V-bottoms. The Californians followed Hawaii, where they were making mini guns, you know, baby guns, the pintails with all the Dick Brewer. And so we were experimenting with all that. You know, Mike Hinson comes out with the down rail. He really made that come to life up in 71. So whatever was going on, you know, we were all connected in following this path and trying everything. We went through twin fins in 1970. Then they went to down rail. Before that, they were pocket rockets with no rocker and flipped up noses and rolled up rails in the nose. Then 510 twin fins with a diamond tail and a fin on each corner. Yeah, I mean, we went through all these periods where we went all the way down to 510. Then we drifted back to 6'8", 7 foot. You know, a gun was 7.6. So all that happened really between 69 and 73. That's it. In those 4 years, we covered all those genres.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
4 years. And
Yeah.
we made them all. All of us collectively made all these boards and surfed them.
While he's sitting here, and I asked him before, and I asked him before you showed up, when did you first meet Randy? And he said, I don't remember. Because you have an impeccable memory of that particular time.
Well, I try and block out the
Well,
dark
I mean, you
things.
remember people's names. I don't remember. Right, Randy, right? You remember all these names. Do you remember when you first met
I'm quite
Randy?
sure that I don't remember our first meeting, but I'm quite sure it would be mid-70s because I would come up to see my dad all through the 70s and visit him, and then I'd surf Scotts Creek in the winter.
So you had a good relationship with your dad, even though he...
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
No, we always stayed in contact
Okay.
with each other.
Right.
I just never made the A-list.
Did your brother?
Hell no. The difference between him and me is which is why I respect him. He never tried. I was making a feeble attempt at it. You know, that's
Yeah.
the only difference between
Right.
us, really. So I'd say Randy, we would have met at Scotts Creek because there was a small court. I don't think sure, Dickie Keating surfed in '72 on a surfboard with bicycle handlebars to turn the fin. That's a famous little clip of film in an old Fred Windish movie. But it really, I'd say 74 is when guys were surfing it. And I was one of them because when you drive down from San Mateo, from Half Moon Bay,
Yeah.
you drive right past all these places, and all these years we're going, that sure looks like a surf spot. You know?
Yeah, right.
And it's a hell of a wave. You know, it's a really good wave. And Randy always surfed the really good, ledgy waves that he was way better at riding than me. But I was always drawn to those kind of waves, so we would have met there.
Did Randy ever buy one of your boards?
Of course not. I would have lost all respect for him. He made his own.
Yeah, yeah,
He knows how to make a good board.
right. Have you ridden one of his?
Yeah, absolutely.
Have you bought one of his?
Of course not.
Yeah.
He would have no respect for me if I did that.
Aren't you glad I invited him to come over here?
Of course.
So I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but back 19. Where were we at before? 1972.
So we're at 72.
72.
And so, I'm making boards. I got rented a little barn. And between Santa Barbara and Montecito, there's an old little neighborhood with a Victorian house, and they had a barn in the backyard. And I said, I'll pay your electric bill if I can use your barn. So they had an extension cord from the house out to my barn. A bunch of hippies were living in it. And my wife and I, who I met and married, she's one of the girls that came to those barbecues all summer. And we lived in an apartment right up the street. So I made a couple boards a week, maybe two or three, I believe. And so that took me 4 days a week. And I always work 6 days a week. I still do. And so I would work 2 full days a week doing piecework. So I started with...
Doing piecework?
For the other board builders.
Okay. Yeah.
Now there's only... I'm sure I'll get this right. I'm only going to talk about downtown Santa Barbara proper, but there was, Bob Duncan had taken over Wilderness by then. There's John Bradbury. Of course, Rennie Yater. And then Al Marc had just come to town about 1969. And so... we were there was a couple guys in Goleta, but I'm just talking about, we had cars that we'd only drive 10 miles, so we really stayed in a region. So we were the main board builders, and so I started sanding for Al Marc. Was the same as me. He built the whole board from scratch by himself, as did I. And he was...
including the fins.
Yeah, we made our own fins
yeah.
too. But he is about 8 years older than me, and so he was getting some dealers back east, and he had extra boards to make, so he asked me if I would sand for him. We just naturally all became friends. So I sanded for Al 1 day a week, and then I laminated for Yater 1 day a week. I ended up working over there, and I'd occasionally laminate for Bradbury and Wilderness. So that was on my 2 days. So I worked 6 days a week making surfboards.
You're making good money. You're making good money for the time, yeah?
Well, good money for us was paying our bills every month.
Yeah.
Having
food.
2 Volkswagens that are paid for, and paying our rent, and life was perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, it was very good.
Yeah.
I always never had to worry about money.
Right.
And we just had enough to get by, and that's all we cared about.
Yeah.
It was perfect, really.
Yeah.
So fast forward, so now Al is getting busier, and now we introduce Bill Barnfield. So Bill Barnfield is about 2 years older than me, and he's from Azusa or somewhere down in East LA originally, but he'd been to the North Shore like in 1970. Surf Pipeline was New Lopez, and then he moved to Seaside, Oregon, where he became like the guru. And he built his board builder. He builds his own boards start to finish, just like all of us did. And here's Billy, who's a extremely colorful character.
Did you know him, Randy? Yeah.
Hell yes. We all know each other.
Yeah.
So Billy comes down, and it's just me and Al working at the Helena Street. In those days, Helena Street is where we built the surfboards, and his wife Terry had a little showroom, and she ran the showroom. So I was the first employee Al ever had that worked in the factory, and because it was just Al, then it was me and Al. So it's me and Al covered with dust. Terry says, "Hey, there's this guy that wants to talk to you." So Al calls me out. We walk in. I'll never forget it. It was like yesterday. We're standing out there in the alley there in Helena Street, me and Al, and here's Billy, he's a short guy with a bowl haircut, 1 tooth missing, and he's totally animated. And he says, "Yeah, guys, I'm looking for work," and he's rattling on about, "I used to live on the North Shore, and I'm up here in Oregon," and he has this cool board he made, a down rail gun. We're looking at it. It's a nice board. And wanted to see if there was work. And then he pulls out a newspaper clipping from the Oregonian. And the front page, this is his resume, okay? And there's a picture, black and white picture, and he's standing there with this pose, with this big grin and a tooth missing and the bowl haircut, wearing a super suit. And you know the O'Neill suit, dry suit with the valve you'd blow on to blow them up.
Yeah.
And it says, the caption says, Billy Barnfield, Dean of Oregon Seaside Surfers. That was the caption. And he's the proudest guy. He shows us this article. And Al and I are completely captivated by this character. And so we're talking to each other. I mean, we're interviewing him. And Al said, well, I'm getting more business. What if, he says to me, all in this one conversation, in this 15 minutes, we decide that I'm going to take over laminating and Billy's going to be the sander. And so Billy's hired. And so because of Billy, we became best friends, and we surfed together every day. We made boards together, and I don't know how long this lasted, but we set up a glass shop, me and Billy, for Al at Carpinteria up it's south of town on the bluff just before it drops down to Rincon. It's some funky building. We had to hang cardboard on the ceilings so that the metal ceilings wouldn't make the resin go off on the top of the hot coat before the bottom went off.
Yeah.
And to keep all the cobwebs off the boards. We set up a glass shop. He had sanded at Hobie, so he knew them really well. He took me down. I got to meet the Patterson brothers and Danny Bronner and all the famous guys that were making boards then, to pick up production techniques. Because I just did, 2 boards at a time. I didn't lay them all out like they do them all in production style. I knew how to blast, but not all those techniques. So I learned all that. We worked for Al maybe not even 4 or 5 months. And then Billy tells Al this, if you're going to be a career surfer, you have to go to the North Shore. And so we jokingly told Al that, real men go to the North Shore. We're going to the North Shore, and we freaking quit.
And what?
We quit.
Yes.
And so Billy and I, we each bought a trunk from Sears Roebuck. They're like $10, a metal trunk, with a little padlock on it. And we both are married. He's still married to Wendy. And we put our tools and our trunks in wax and 2 t-shirts and 1 pair of flip-flops, and then whatever room was left in the trunk, our wives could put their stuff in. And so we got one-way tickets to Oahu, and we moved there with no intention, no plan whatsoever. So we moved to the North Shore and we went
1970 when?
73.
Okay.
1973. So we went there because we're career board surfboard builders, and that's what you do. So we went there to be students. So I didn't go there to shape. I went there to learn. And so I immediately got a job blasting for Mikey, who had the Bing license. He made all the Bings for all the famous surfers that, Peter Cole and Keith Paul. All those kind of guys. Why did my mind go blank? Mr. Sunset. Yeah, Jeff Hackman. And so Hackman was, also all those guys are coming to the house to have me glass their boards. They get a shape blank from Eaton, and he'd send them over to my house because I'd get them done like in 4 days. So to get the guys in the water. So I didn't do like high end. I did outdoor glassing at my house because I could do 1 board a day. I'd laminate it in the morning, the bottom. I'd flip it over, laminate the deck. Then I'd hot coat the deck. Have lunch, then I'd flip it over and hot coat the bottom. Then I'd surf all afternoon. And then at 4 o'clock, I'd come in and sand it and gloss just the bottom and rail. Right as the sun was going down, because everything would go calm and you could gloss outdoors. So I'd 1 board a day from start to finish, and you'd go surfing. Glass on the fin and all that. So in that time, Billy had Jerry Lopez shape his guns. So in those days, the regulars, I surfed at Wellesley Land. We lived at Wellesley Land. I surfed Sunset Beach every day it broke for that whole season. We got there in September and I left in March. And so I got to slowly kind of work up to it. But Reno Abalera, the regulars who were out like every day it broke were Reno Abalera, Ben Ipa, Jeff Hackman, Roger, Gary Speece was out, and who's Roger Erickson was always out. His daughter Emmy is the famous big wave rider today, and Peter Cole was always out. I mean, those are the guys who are out every day, and it wasn't crowded. I mean, it seemed to me that there was rarely more than a dozen guys out.
And you're accepted there.
No, I was invisible. They didn't care if I was out.
Yeah.
I never ever had a problem on the North Shore with anybody.
Yeah.
They don't, if you're disrespectful, then then you're in their radar. I never was.
Yeah.
I just surfed the outside. I shadowed Jeff Hackman. He was the guy that always surfed the outside boil. He was never inside with everyone else. And there's commonly 2 wave sets, so he always took whatever wave he wanted. And then if there was a second wave, I'd be the only one out there.
Yeah.
So I had Barry Kanaiapuni shape me a 9-foot gun, so I got to meet Kanaiapuni and ride aboard shaped by somebody, because I don't know how to shape guns. From Santa Barbara, I'm a Miramar. I'm a 2-foot and under specialist. So I had the biggest board at Sunset Beach. Everybody rode my board, because people were riding 8-foot boards then, and they thought it was so cool. Wow, I think it's 9.2, and at the time, I bet I only weighed 138 pounds, because I swam all day, every day after my board. There were no surf leashes then, and all I did was swim, because every other wave was the worst wipeout of your life. For real. You swim in and get it, go back out.
Yeah.
Do that every day. So
You spent more time swimming than surfing.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I was a better swimmer than surfer. But it was the greatest, for me, the highlight of my surfing career.
Was.
For sure.
Was
Being
that time?
Absolutely. Surfing the North Shore with those people. I idolized all those people. And every one of them would routinely, drop in on me and cut me off, and snuff me into the whitewater. They'd fade and then do the big turn.
Yeah.
And so I used to tell that story all the time, and finally one guy said, well, it's obvious that you weren't shoulder hopping. I said, I never thought about that, because I'm afraid of getting pitched over the falls. I would always take off as far outside as you could to get an early roll in.
Right.
And so I was out on the peak. And so if those guys were inside of me, so I've been cut off, but Jerry Lopez was always out when Pipeline wasn't breaking. So all those guys, I've
just
got
cut
to
you
surf
off.
with them.
Yeah.
Right, this far away, watching these guys in their little speed crouches and then driving through those bottom turns. And, that's where I learned about that type of surfing. Because I always wanted to understand, how can they do what they're doing? It takes a couple of years to figure that out.
When did you get to their position? Did you ever get there?
Well, I would say that the best I ever surfed in bigger waves didn't actually happen until I was in my 50s. My 50s were my best decade.
We're going to get that down the road.
Yeah, that's later. So anyway, I injured my back inside Sunset. It's just incredibly nasty. I mean, the guys that surf Pipeline say, I don't like surfing Sunset, it's too dangerous. And the guys that surf Sunset say, I'm not surfing Pipeline, it's too dangerous. They're both really dangerous in 2 different ways. But that inside reef will just annihilate you. I've known of people to have their shoulders dislocated, just pulled out of the sockets from the impact of the waves. I was whiplashed so bad that it took me a year for my back to recover, and I crushed all my discs just from getting sucked up and over the falls in there. Pulled into a barrel, I was finally feeling really comfortable surfing Sunset. There's only one guy out, it's like an 8-foot day. And I just rolled into a wave and pulled in, and it just sucked me up and over. And so I decided not to stay on the North Shore after that. And I went back to Santa Barbara and resumed my board business there. Billy never left, he's still there. Think about how long ago that was.
Yeah, back in the early 70s.
Yeah.
Did you go back to Santa Barbara because the waves were too much for you?
Well, Santa Barbara was home for me.
It was always home?
Yeah, and that's where I had my surfboard business was there.
I think Manny mentioned it, you talked about, you think of Santa Barbara as being Northern California or Southern California?
It's considered neither. They call it Central California.
Right.
We're not part of LA. LA starts in Ventura, in south down to Imperial Beach.
That's true.
Yeah.
I can only say that because this is a NorCal show. Nobody wants to hear that. So that's how we viewed it, really.
Yeah.
You know, tongue in cheek, of
Yeah.
course. But the Santa Cruz guys love coming to Santa Barbara because of the ranch in Rincon. And the Santa Barbara guys, we loved coming to Santa Cruz because it's just such a cool place. And there's surf here in the summer, and we don't have waves in the summer.
Right. No. Yeah.
So there was a connection, and I think I talked about that in the 60s where I met Paul Meltzer and Ken Kaufman and Arthur Gimp, and I got connected to the Santa Cruz crew in the 60s. So there's always been a back and forth exchange, you know, plus I was visiting my dad in the Bay Area, so I was always up here.
How many times do you think you've made that drive from Santa Barbara to Santa Cruz?
It's uncountable. Many times,
Yeah.
that's for sure. So
Do you ever take the Big Sur, go through Big Sur and then
Love
surf
that.
there? And
Absolutely.
Surf. Yeah.
I did that all through the 70s when I'd come up to see my dad. Because I always drove Volkswagen, so it's a 2-day trip to go from Santa Barbara to the Bay Area. So we'd go up through Big Sur, and I'd surf Pico Creek, and we'd work, and I'd surf Fuller's, and then I'd stay in
Still with no leash. Or leash at
I
that
think
time.
leashes, this would have been after the North Shore.
Right.
So we had leashes. When I came back, by the end of 74, we were using leashes.
Okay.
Like the beginning of 75, I think this 75 is like the year when
Yeah.
pretty much
I
everybody
mean,
used
for someone who swam as much as you did, this must have been a blessing in disguise.
Well, I had destroyed every single board I ever owned on the rocks.
Yeah.
Every single one, you
Yeah.
know, so that's why I was happy about it. Because in the rock dance, nobody ever gets good at that.
No. No.
That's not graceful.
no.
That is not graceful.
Yeah.
So yeah, there were leashes, but it was interesting because I never surfed with anybody at Fuller's or Pico Creek in all those years of driving through there, or Montaña de Oro. I never surfed with anybody there.
Were you told about those surf spots, or did you find them for
When
yourself?
you're a board builder,
Yeah.
everyone tells you
Right. Okay.
everything you want to know.
Right.
I mean,
No
Jeff-
secrets.
They're all secrets,
But
but they're among a small group of people.
Yeah.
Right, Randy? I mean, all of us were told. I mean, if you're making people surfboards, you know, they take care of you. You're on the inside. I knew about every place. I always go, how did I know about these places? Everybody that knew them would tell you,
Yeah. Yeah.
because you're connected to people all up and down the coast. So I would surf those places. How the hell do you find Fuller's? I found it, and it was.
But at that point, it could have been a trail down there. What did
Well,
you?
it was just like a straight chute.
Yeah.
You know, it was a trail that went straight down. The last 30 feet, you had to slide on your butt to get down to the sand. I don't know how we got back up.
How'd you get back up?
I guess we had to just crawl through the dirt to get back up
And
there.
the poison oak.
Well, there was like a little furrow, or what do you call it, like a berm that just from people going straight down,
Yeah.
just from erosion. So you'd go through the middle of the poison oak. I never got it. And then we'd stay in Pacific Grove, and I'd surf at Sillamar. I love that place, and it was always good. You know, 'cause it's winter time. I don't know when it was. Too many decades ago, but I always got good waves there.
Yeah.
There'd be 3 or 4 guys out.
Yeah.
You know, there just weren't a lot of surfers there in those decades, especially in the outlying areas.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
those were fun times. But that was really the beginning of my, you know, so my surfboard career is blossoming, and I had a number of shops in town.
That carried your boards.
No, I mean factories. I always had my own factory.
Yeah.
And then I stopped doing piecework eventually for the other board builders because I now finally had a big enough clientele that I was full-time making my own boards. And now I reached the point where I need a laminator and a sander and a shop guy and all that. And so that happened about 1976. And I heard Yater, because we're friends now, and we surfed together in those periods during those years. And Rennie has always said, I hate making longboards. He's a very contemporary guy. He didn't want to make longboards. And longboarding was coming back a little bit. Everyone wanted a spoon from him.
Everybody wanted what?
Like a spoon, a
Yeah,
Yater spoon.
yeah.
He doesn't want to make those. He wants to make modern contemporary boards. So I heard he was thinking of selling out. So I always laugh to picture myself at whatever, 25 years old. Hey Rennie, how about if I buy you out? Like I have probably $200 in the bank. I don't know why I would even think that was feasible.
How much was he selling? How much was he selling his business
No,
for?
I just heard that he was thinking of it.
Right, okay.
So I go down. My shop was only 2 blocks away, so I just walk over. Hey Rennie, I was thinking, and I'm pretty shy, so it's probably a pretty feeble conversation. And I said, well, if you're thinking of quitting, maybe I could carry on what you're doing. And he said, this is just my recollection of the conversation. It was all of about 3.5 minutes long. So you have to know Rennie to understand he's a man of few words. And so this conversation, and the time that I'm saying, well, if you quit, I'll take over what you're doing. He says, well, you know what? Because Rennie's a commercial fisherman. He makes boards on the side. He said, why don't you just move into the shop and we'll split all the expenses and I'll contract all my glass work to you. Okay, that sounds good. So that's what happened. It was a 5-minute conversation because the two of us are a lot alike. We have work on a schedule. There's no worrying about who's going to do what and when. And so when they widened the freeway in Santa Barbara, I probably was talking to him because I knew my shop was going to be knocked down because it was on the access road and they're going to widen the freeway. So it was going to have to move. So I move in 3 months later. And, that was really so fantastic. So now I end up in this beautiful factory that was made by the Castanola brothers for Rennie to be a surfboard factory. And I'd built all my own shops out and copied the Yater shop. Their sanding dust collection room and the fan through the ceiling. I don't know how many times I built those things. I had 3 or 4 places. Plus we helped Al Merrick do all that stuff to his building. So I always had to build my own places. I'd have my brother help me. Billy Barnfield helped, whoever. Kim Robinson helped me put shops together. He was in construction on the side then. So now I'm in the Yater shop, and Rennie only shapes, routes his own fin boxes, and glosses his own boards, and my crew is going to glass them. So now I have a business. We both make about 300 boards a year. I make the same. Him and I made the most boards at the time in town. So I now have a factory, and I'm making 700 boards a year, and I'm 26 years old. It was and I have Kirk Putnam watching the showroom. That's a whole nother story. We won't go into that. But it was the greatest. It was who would have ever thought that I never even tried to be in the business? And, and here it's, 5 or 6 years later. And it's wow, I've lived on the North Shore. I've had this career. And at that time, there were very few surfers older than us. And I'm thinking, man, when you get to 30, I guess you're going to have to find a real job. And
did you ever find a real job?
No. But it was a fantastic period, and in those years was the most money I ever made. And I remember that I cleared $16,000 a year in the late 60s. This is in the late 70s.
And you're 25?
26,
yeah.
Now 26, 27. And in those days, our house that we bought was $40,000 on Cliff Drive, and my mortgage was $250. And I had 2 Volkswagens that are obviously paid for. And I'd always trade. Every surfer in those days were almost all blue collar. And so, we knew body guys, mechanics, and just furniture makers. So we traded surfboards for everything.
Right.
So it was all barter.
Right.
We weren't too far different from the Chumash, who are really the real
the
possessors of the land.
Right.
You know.
Right.
And so life was easy, and
Was that the most fun period for you that time?
I would say so. I mean, that was probably the magic period.
That was the magic that time. Yeah.
Yeah, it would have to be. It was a time of innocence. You know, life was simple. We had a very tight-knit community. In those days, you were either in the drug, you know, going down the drug path or going down the religious path. And Mike, all of our friends, we believed in Christ. We went to church. I ended up going to the Catholic Church. I still do. And we were, you know, like the teetotalers of sorts. And because there was no in the middle, you know, it was like one extreme or the other. And so that was the period.
Was Santa Barbara like? Was Santa Cruz like Santa Barbara? Were they very different?
Santa Barbara. Here's the best comparison that I can make. So Santa Barbara and Santa Cruz are completely different. And so you always laugh about, you know, we were on a boat. I'm sure I was with a group of people whose names I won't mention. We're on a surf trip together, probably at the ranch. And we're talking about all the similarities between Santa Barbara and Santa Cruz. And so they made this analogy in the drug trade. And they said, well, you know, in Santa Barbara, you have these guys, you know, with the bowl haircuts, and they kind of blow dry their hair, and they have their little Porsches, and they sell lids. He says in Santa Cruz, a guy has, you know, a derelict trawler that he runs aground at 3 a.m, you know, with 50 kilos on it, you know. And so I always thought, well, that's kind of, because Santa Cruz is way hardcore compared to Santa Barbara, you know. I mean, we have our colorful characters down there, but it wasn't like up here. You know, this is much more raw.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a pretty good analogy.
Did you come up here often at that time?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, all my life I've been coming up here.
Yeah.
Because my dad, we'd see my dad every summer.
Who still lived at that time in San Mateo?
Yes.
Right.
So we were up every summer and every winter, twice a year, and always stayed for 10 days. So I've since I've started surfing, I've always been surfing the North Coast and Santa Cruz
Right.
since the early '60s.
Did you ever give your dad a board?
I did. I made him a redwood hot curl, and I had Kevin Ansell make the family Andreini crest with a stallion, mother of pearl reared up, superimposed on the crest, because my dad was big in the horse racing world. And I put, I can't remember how you say 1,000 thanks in Italian.
Yeah.
But I had that inscribed on the board, and I gave him the board, which he really, he loved it. You know,
Is that board still around?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's in his family, one of his family homes.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So where are we? 1975?
Yeah, so now we made it to 76, 77. And now, you know, the pro surfing is starting to get roots. You know, it's really was more the Australians, I'd say, the South Africans. You know, Randy knows a lot more about it than me, but there was a big push for, we want to be like tennis players. We want to get paid, be professional surfers and get paid. And the laid-back Californians generally, especially where I was from, Santa Barbara, black wetsuits and clear boards and surfing secret spots, and, you know, keep everyone else out of our little lifestyle unless you're in it. None of this selling it out. So I was always that wasn't of interest to me. I just liked to make surfboards for people. So that was my path. And my dad, you know, had this insurance agency that his dad, our grandfather, it's a long history of my family, but my grandfather came from the old country, and he was, you know, a very successful businessman, and had founded an insurance company, retired, had a family, and then he started one for his own kids, which is my dad and uncles and my aunt. And so it always led us to believe that we would own it someday. So my brother and I, as we got to about 30 years old, felt this duty, this is my mom's upbringing, that, instead of sitting around waiting for someone to just, hand us a bunch of money, this is how we envisioned it was going to happen. Boy, were we naive. So we thought, why don't we go up there and work there and help carry it on?
In the insurance business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Peter went up first in 78 or 79, and then I went up at the end of 79, like 1980. And I just stopped making boards. I never intended it to be a career, but I had 10 or 11 years of what an incredible... I mean, to me, I thought, well, there's nothing else to do. What am I
Did you
gonna
feel
do?
you had to make a change?
No, it was a call of duty. It's
Yeah.
like when I did my civil service work. It's just
Yeah.
something I had to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's why I did it. I
Yeah.
did it for the family.
Right.
And I mean, there's a lot of compelling reasons to do it. And so I just stopped making boards. I moved up here, and it wasn't even in 6 months. Bruce Fowler, who ran the White Owl shop, which is now retail, was up here managing the O'Neill shop, and I did make boards for the White Owl retail stores in the 70s. And so he had me start making my boards that I made for them for the O'Neill shop. So I still have all the O'Neill lamps. I'd put an Andreini on the deck and an O'Neill on the bottom. And I was making boards just for fun on the side for the O'Neill store. And and then slowly people were asking me for boards, and now I'm back to making boards on the weekend, just like I did when I was doing my civil service work.
So you're doing insurance work 5 days a week, and you're
Yeah.
making boards 2 days a week.
Yes.
Yeah.
And now I make the whole board start to finish.
Did you enjoy the insurance work? Was it something you enjoyed?
It's
or?
very difficult.
Right.
I'm a blue collar guy. I didn't go to college. Learning a trade like that, it's extremely difficult to make that transition because
Yeah, but did you enjoy it? I mean, it sounds like
Well,
you had the perfect.
yes and no.
You had the perfect.
Mostly no.
You had the perfect career going with the surfing industry.
Well, but I didn't. But the problem is that where surfing was going, it was going down a path where I could visualize having to be a retailer and have a lot more products and to do more than just be a surfboard builder, and I wasn't interested in that. So I was interested in surfing the way it was when I did it, and
Yeah.
I could see it was changing.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to continue. I didn't want to have to adapt and try and fit into whatever it was going to become.
Right.
I didn't.
Right.
And so now I have this career. I have a reason to do it, but no, it's difficult work, very stressful, and I've always loved working on boards since I was 12. So I did that on the weekends, and over time that became. Now I'm making 30, 40 boards a year on the side, and then it's 50, and then it's 55, and then it's 60, and it just slowly kind of crept back. And then
You never let it go. It kept coming.
Yeah, I never tried to be in the business. I never have tried to be. I just, when people ask me to do work, I never turn down work. It seems like a bad idea. And so it just became a business. It just grew into a bigger business again. And then Joel introduced, Herbie Fletcher started it, the renaissance for longboarding in the 70s. But really, when Joel Tudor came around,
Yeah.
and Thomas Campbell was making his films. This is probably now late 80s and into the 90s. I don't know when it was. I'd say it's in the 90s. It's somewhere in the early 90s. I loved all that people were embracing all the wonderful things that we'd abandoned. Because I never stopped longboarding, and I had a real interest in those displacement hull type boards that were the transition. So that was my personal passion. And so now people were like, oh, if you want that type of a board, there literally was only 3 or 4 of us that really made that stuff, right? I was one of them. I mean, Greg Little, made them, and a couple guys, Skip Fry, had made those type of boards. A group of guys in San Diego were known for doing it. Stu Kenson was one of them, So there's a group of guys that made that stuff. But I was one of them, and so guys started calling me and asking me to make boards, retro long boards and stuff like that. And so, that's how, I guess we're in the 80s now. we made the shift. So, well, since we're in the 80s, let me get back to how I ended up really, once I started getting busy making boards, this is where Randy French comes in. So
he's shaking his head over there.
I don't know, because I knew Randy, and we don't remember how it happened, but I'm sure it was surfing Scotts Creek. I ended up, was it on Brommer, 7th Avenue? 17th? He had his factory there, and he had me come in and work there. He did all my glassing. So I could shape there. He had an extra shaping room. So because I was shaping at home, it's so long ago. Think about how long ago that is. So I was shaping at home, glassing at home. Then I get invited by Randy to work there, here in Santa Cruz. And that went, I recall it lasting for maybe 1 or 2 years. And then he decided that he wasn't going to glass anymore, and he gave me the boot.
Can we go back to that conversation? How'd that conversation go? Do you remember?
I wish I could remember. But we parted friends, of course. It wasn't any, it was...
There's no animosity.
Oh, good God, no. No, he was making a shift. I think, is that when you went to Sea Trend up to Oregon? Windsurfing. Yeah, I mean, he went to a whole different process of making boards. And that was his big move. And so it was really serendipitous. Simultaneous to that, that's when Doug Hout invited me to just come over and work out of his place.
Yeah.
And so so I started at Randy's. I was there for 2 years. And then I've been at Doug's to this day. And Doug, I've known him since I was a teenager, because I used to watch him shape and was always around. And when I was in Santa Barbara, I always visited the house shop when I'd come up here in the 70s. And Mark Angel was one of the top guys shaping boards then. Angel was connected to Hout, and Angel used to come down to my shop and he'd shape there. And so we always had a connection. As board builders, we all know each other.
Right.
So I got invited to the house shop, and I have worked there when Mike Wash was glassing. Probably the finest laminator I ever worked with. It'd be Mike Wash. It was incredible. And he passed away. It's been quite a few years ago now, maybe 20. Again, I don't know, a long time. But I shared a shaping room with Rick Newey, and little Bucky had done in the 6th grade, one of those poster board school projects about making surfboards. And he has these little snapshots of the different stages. And at the bottom it says, this is his conclusion. He's summing up his little summary. He says, making surfboards isn't rocket science. Every time I walked in that room, I'd look at it, I'd read it, I'd just start laughing. So I shaped there, for many years until I started shaping at my house again. And then I just drive the boards down to the shop to get glassed.
Yeah.
So that's the 80s, the beginning of the 80s.
We're going to come back to that. We're going to do another show in the 80s.
Yeah, 80s and 90s. What about 2000s? I mean, how many decades are we short here?
We can do the 80s. I'm all for the 80s. What was different between the 80s and the 70s?
The 80s were a period. For me, it was a very quiet period. Surfing was very quiet.
Because you had the other career going on?
That's part of it, but windsurfing had become a huge thing. And there's
so he made the right move.
Of course he did.
Yeah.
I'm always in the dust. That's the story of my life. But yeah, windsurfing was a huge deal. Randy helped me. I shaped only a handful for people that I knew that wanted them, and he helped me do the slalom boards and the asymmetrical wave riding boards. Really beautiful craft. I mean, he made beautiful stuff. And it was really fun for me making some of those. And of course, I tried windsurfing, and like every other sport, I was just horrible. I just could not graduate past, a Bic 16 footer in the lake with the dagger board. And when a gust of wind would hit it, it'd take the sail and just catapult me right over the bow, you know.
Did you ever see that, Randy? You ever see him? Did you see him ever go airborne?
It was embarrassing.
Yeah.
So I just stuck with surfing, but the board building was quiet in the 80s. It wasn't until the late 80s with the resurgence of the retro movement that surfboard building started to grow again for me. So that period was quiet for me. I was surfing very incredible waves. We were all still surfing Scotts Creek, and through the 80s, there's maybe 12 of us that were regulars. Every time you went out, it's the same guys. We all knew when to go. And I remember surfing in town when it would be really big. Nobody surfed privates then.
Yeah.
I had friends tell me, yeah, privates is kind of an interesting wave. And one time I went and surfed it. And I remember, how do you get down here? I paddled down there. And I mean, it was like a solid 6 foot just roping through there. And it's kind of a flat wave. And there's no one out, you know. And I remember I surfed it and I go, oh, that's interesting. I never went back.
You never did?
We didn't have to. I mean, we surfed
Right.
Sewer Peak, First Peak,
Yeah.
Indicator,
You have to slap all the way down there.
Mitchell's.
Yeah.
We surfed all the good spots. I mean, you didn't have to waste your time
Paddling
going down there.
Yeah.
You know, it's too slow.
Yeah.
You know, I still laugh when I think of now that I'm a regular there
Because it's slow.
I can't surf anywhere else. So
You surfed pretty
I
good
laugh.
the other day when we surfed. And your brother too.
Well, for our age, we're age appropriate.
Yeah.
We
Well,
get
all
around,
are. Right.
but still, you know, you can't compete with kids on boards that can duck dive and surf Indicator.
Yeah.
You know, they duck dive 8 foot soup, and
Yeah.
I'm on a barge. You know,
Right.
I end up down at the pier trying to roll one wave, and they can just paddle 3 foot upside you and bump start.
Right.
You cannot get away.
No.
You know,
No.
there's over 6 people out. I won't go up there anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, that's about never
Yeah.
that happens.
Yeah.
We had our run. We're fortunate.
Randy, you think you want to ask this guy right here? Is there anything you want to bring up? I mean, you want to say, want to interject a couple of things, or one question?
Asking the best surf trip he's ever been on.
All right,
I
here
would
we
be
go.
happy to tell you
I'm
that.
asking you, what's the best surf trip you've ever been
The
on?
best surf trip I ever.
It sounded like Peru, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, the best surf trip I ever went on was with Randy. He invited me to go to the Maldives, and I don't remember. We were trying
year
to
was that?
remember. 2001, 2002. Yeah, it was around there, and we were on. It was a wood hull. I believe it was a wood hull. It's 100 foot long, beautiful boat, and he had his crew, some great Santa Cruz guys. We were all there. We were all together, and I was with Kim Robinson, you know, from the Channel Islands place. We were best friends since we were teenagers, and him and I bunked together, and we surfed 3 times a day. So you could only surf when the tide was moving and not moving very much. And so 3 times a day for 10 days, so that's 30 sessions, and I'd say 26 of them were the best sessions of my life.
Really?
I'll never forget it. It was so epic.
What
We
was
had
so good?
so much fun.
Yeah.
Well, it's the surf. It was like the Hollister Ranch, except bigger and warm. And we'd fish. They would fish off the back of the boat every day, just in the channel where we're moored, and get the most beautiful, you know, yellowfin tuna, and make sushi, you know, right on the back of the boat.
Wow.
The meals were fantastic, and what a fun group of people. We had so much fun, and we met people from all over. There was people from Spain and France and Italy, and they all had their different boats, and these guys love roasting people, which is really foreign to me. I was really shocked.
You've never roasted anybody before?
Oh, of course not. And everyone would tease me because I brought a 710 and a 7.6, so I had the 2 longest boards on the boat. And they, you know, would roast me about, oh yeah, you're a longboarder, and I'd say, oh yeah, right, a longboard. That's a shortboard, you know. And so after
But those
about,
boards worked, too, didn't they? They worked.
better than anything else on the boat.
What was
I
Randy
had to
riding?
say that.
What were you riding, Randy? Remember?
He's riding a 6.6 single wing swallowtail twin fin, and he ripped on it.
Yeah.
He did.
Yeah.
He always rode small boards, and that would have been a bigger board for him. I think it was 6.4, maybe it was 6.6. But one day these Italian guys come over, and they can barely speak English. So funny, and they're down at the bow, at the stern, and I'm up on the upper deck, and they're all they're doing sign language, and they're pointing at these pictures, and they're basically, and Randy's down there with his posse, and they're trying to understand what these crazy Dagos are trying to say, and then they just start busting up laughing, and then they turn around, they get on down here, and they start yelling at me. They're looking for the longboarder. They thought it was the funniest thing that ever happened. Well, in Italy, they don't know what a longboard is, so they're watching me surf, and they'd taken pictures of me surfing, and they wanted to bring these pictures over to show me. I got some really, I could ride bigger waves than the other guys because I had a bigger board.
Right.
And so they came over, where's the longboarder? And they had all these pictures. They're all proud. They thought I'd be all happy about it. So they've roasted me for the rest of the trip about being the longboarder with my 710.
You didn't care.
Of course not.
No, you're catching waves. All right.
What a trip.
That was the 70s. We got a little bit into the 80s. We got a little ahead of ourselves, but
We did.
we'll get back.
Good.
And we're going to do the next show at Mr. French's house. He's invited us over.
Perfect.
You know, but
Well-
if you're going to come over, I think he's going to want one of those jackets.
I'll bring. Wait a minute. No, I'll bring him one.
Yeah.
You don't have one?
Well, he doesn't have one of your
I don't
boats,
need
I
one.
said.
No, he deserves one. I don't deserve one. He deserves one.
I have a book for him.
Perfect. I would love to do that, albeit definitely do it at his house because
Yeah.
there's a fire pit.
Yeah, we'll discuss the rest of you.
And the wine cellar, I've already inspected it.
Have you
And it's up to snuff.
Did you
It
pull
meets
something out?
muster.
Huh?
It meets muster.
It'd be-
Oh yeah.
Mr. Andreini, thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. And your. I don't think I've ever met somebody who knew so many names from the ninth from 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah, that's
Did you
the
shake
reason
your
I
head?
wanted to come because I want, he remembers all this stuff. I can't remember shit anymore.
Right.
He
You
remembers
remember
all
plenty.
these names, and I know a lot of these people. And
But did you
I've served
when he
with
said
most of them.
when he said some of the names, you're like, oh, I remember that guy.
We're about the same age,
Yeah.
so we shaped during the same eras
Yeah.
and whatnot.
Yeah.
We have a lot of parallels. And of course, that's why he's in my book.
But I had
Yeah.
a very different philosophy about the way that I approached. Like I never worked for anybody,
Yeah.
and I was a shaping snob. In other words, I wouldn't make a board for somebody that I didn't think they were.
Worthy of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
If
Yeah.
they didn't surf good enough, and I hadn't seen them surf.
And yeah.
But we have very much
Were you
have
a,
parallels.
see, he just called
in our
himself a
life.
surfing snob. Are you a surfing snob?
No.
he's
You,
not at all.
I'm-
you're a surfing. I wanted to mention the word, but like you make a board for anybody.
I do. Actually, I love making boards. Actually, working with high-level pro surfers is actually the most difficult. That's the thing I do the least of and enjoy the least.
Yeah.
Because they have too many conflicting, they have sponsors and all this stuff, and I just like making boards for everyday people and helping elevate whatever they're getting out of their surfing.
Yeah.
Bring them up a notch. That's what I do for myself.
What's the waiting time right now for an Andreini board?
About a year and a half.
There you go.
All I have to do is still be kicking, and I'll make it for him.
That's because when I call him, I go, "Mark, is my board done yet?"
We harass the shit out of each other. I love harassing him, and he never gets tired of harassing me.
That's what good friends are all. That's what good friends are all about. You can't harass.
Well, I try not to include you because I know it's hard to not turn around and get validation. But yeah, we were on a very parallel paths, just in two different places. But we weren't good friends until into the 80s.
Yeah.
We were just acquaintances really in that 70s period.
Mr. Andreini, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. French, thanks for coming down. God bless you. Cheers. Back
I
soon.
love to hear the stories.
Huh?
Great story.
Yeah, I love
Great
I love
story.
to hear the stories.
Great stories.
Unbelievable.